Decade on decade, we're having less and less sex. The fact that we're just spending so much of our time on our phones, swiping, clicking, and that takes us away from touching our partners, touching ourselves, feeling sexual and embodied. For as long as you're at war with your body, you're going to really struggle to enjoy sexual pleasure. Go on dates and be kind of dreading the point at which someone would say, should we go back together? I had a really unsafe relationship to myself. In order to feel pleasure with yourself, you have to feel safe in your own company. When you're going out into the world, not able to care for yourself, it makes you, I think, very vulnerable to other people then using and abusing you, breaching your boundaries because you haven't really set your own boundaries because you don't have them with yourself. The way I had sex was very much in accordance to what I felt was kind of like my duty to please a man. And I would really have sex in order to give the other person pleasure and really not think about my own body and my own pleasure. So I really began to build a better relationship to myself as I realized how much I was missing out on. I think we have to break away from the idea that there is one specific model of what a healthy relationship looks like. There's loads of different ways to build a happy life, and there's loads of different ways to build a happy relationship, and that can look very different from person to person, from couple to couple.
I'm Lindsey Kane, and welcome to Bedtime Theories. Are you like me? At bedtime, when you're about to fall into a deep slumber, all these questions just pop into your head. What is life? Why are we here? What's my purpose? What is happiness? And is it a choice? So I'm on a mission to unpick all these thoughts and theories that pop into my head and figure out how to live a happy and fulfilled life. So as well as my insights, I couldn't do this alone. I had to invite some incredible guests, some people that I have personally watched over the years and have looked up to and thought, how are they doing what they're doing? So come and jump into bed with me and my guest and listen to Bedtime Theories. Okay, so Emma, sex. Let's talk about it. So tell me a bit about you and how you got into the world of sex and talking about it. And you've got a podcast, you've got a show. Tell us about that.
I love that you call it a show, because that is the dream. I basically want my own Graham Norton chat show, but around like sex and current affairs. So that's what the whole of Sex Talks is basically leading to. It's currently a podcast and a live event series. So it's kind of the big thrust of it is a live podcast recording, because I think that one of the big things around sex is there's still such a taboo around the topic. And so from the beginning of Sex Talks, it was always really important for me to have a live component, because I think there's such a brilliant way of breaking down the shame we feel about sex. You're sitting in a room full of people, all of whom have collectively decided to go to a talk on sex. Even if you don't put up your hand, even if you don't say anything, the fact that you are around other people who are curious and asking questions about this very taboo topic, for me, that's always been such a big, great way of breaking down the shame that we often feel about this topic. I always say but if you had said to me 2.5 years ago, you will be talking about sex professionally as your career, you will write a book about sex, you will be someone who sits on other people's podcasts talking about sex, I would have stared at you blankly and then burst out laughing. I used to work in news and current affairs. I was in producing. I was a producer at Sky, at BBC, then worked for Tina Brown in New York, very much around politics, always interested in gender inequality issues or gender equality issues. But sex was not part of my remit. And I personally didn't like sex very much. It wasn't something that I felt super comfortable about. I had a lot of anxiety around sex and just a pretty bad relationship to it overall. But it was during the pandemic, I went, we were dipping in and out of being allowed to socialize. So this is
eat out to help out while Boris was having his get-togethers.
Exactly that period.
I remember it.
Eat out to help out. Obviously, there've been so many great memes about eating out, which I have dined on ever since. But it was in one of the points of that period in which we were allowed to see friends. And I went to this dinner party with a girl I actually didn't really know, and she'd brought together all her friends. So everyone was pretty much a stranger there. And for whatever reason, because I really didn't talk about sex much then at all, even with close friends, it just wasn't something I felt super comfortable talking about, chiefly because it felt as though everyone around me was having incredible sex, mind-blowingly good sex. And there I was feeling perennially so anxious about sex. I'd go on dates and be kind of dreading the point at which someone would say, should we go back together? Because I would think, like, I'm not good at this. I don't know how to do it. I feel really awkward. So we were sitting around this table, and for whatever reason, I started talking about sex, the girls sitting on either side of me. And I said all this. I said, ever since I'd broken up with my one kind of formative long-term relationship at kind of 23, 24, I just hadn't been able to enjoy sex, and I wasn't able to orgasm in partnered sex, and didn't really masturbate. So, that wasn't really kind of a thing. That wasn't really part of my sexual lexicon then, shall we say. And so I was telling this to both these two girls, and I was just saying, I just don't think I'm a very sexual person. I just don't think it's for me. And they looked horrified. They were like, wait, what? And then one of them turned back to me and said, Emma, this is something you can fix. As it transpired, both of these women had gone to see separately the same sex therapist, Alex.
Wow, I didn't even know there was a thing.
I didn't know it was a thing either. I like dabbled in therapy, as lots of people have, and I think therapy's become so in vogue now. And I honestly it's never really stuck for me. I found it really. I know you should break through, and I know I should probably do therapy now, and I definitely will find a great therapist one day. But I just found the kind of constant return to, so what's your relationship like with your mum? What's your relationship like with your dad? Just really boring. I was like, yes, I have daddy issues. Yes, I feel resentment towards my mum sometimes. Like, who doesn't? So I'd never heard of sex therapy. And had, as I said, kind of dabbled with normal therapy, but it just hadn't really suited me. But anyway, these two girls had gone to sex therapy, and they'd since become proselytizers for the benefits of sex therapy. Both of them had their relationship to sex profoundly changed by the sex therapist, Alex. So they gave me Alex's number, and they insisted that I called her. And I respond very well to a business incentive to do things. I think had I just got her number and been like, okay, off I go, it maybe wouldn't have happened. But I was on the phone to my very good friend Sharmadine the following day, and was like, I think I might do sex therapy, just kind of in passing. And I was writing for The Stack at the time, which is her women's network platform, which had a big editorial platform at the time. And she had the bright idea of doing a column about my experience doing sex therapy. She was like, write up your experience. It'll be conversations with my sex therapist. Write down the nitty gritty of this whole process. It'll be great. Obviously, we should be mining our traumas for content, but it was the business incentive I needed to actually do the sex therapy. And so it was in that kind of period of coming in and out of the lockdowns during the pandemic that I started seeing Alex. And it just totally transformed my relationship to sex. And I think it made me realize very quickly on just how much our relationship to sex relates to so many other aspects of our lives. It's about our confidence in ourselves, our relationship to our body, how we experience our body, how we kind of show love to our body, how we relate to others, our capacity for vulnerability. It really encompasses so many different things. It's never just about fucking. And it was while seeing Alex that I realized pretty quickly on I'd had an eating disorder for pretty much most of my life. I first was anorexic at age 12, then that evolved into bulimia, and I'd had a pretty toxic relationship to my body basically for as long as I could remember. And it was talking to Alex in the context of sex therapy that I realized the extent to which my very messed up relationship to my body was impacting on my relationship to sex. And she said one line to me that I will never forget and changed me profoundly, and that was, for as long as you're at war with your body, you're going to really struggle to enjoy sexual pleasure. And I had been bulimic for probably 17 years by that point, on and off, and not really extremely, but enough that it was a very much a kind of a part of my life and the thing I would recourse to, especially when I was anxious. And since doing sex therapy, I have never been bulimic again. So much of the work we did in the sex therapy room was about building up my relationship to myself, through pleasure and through learning how to, appreciate and experience pleasure. But in order to feel pleasure with yourself, you have to feel safe in your own company. And so much of an eating disorder, and bulimia particularly, is about you make yourself unsafe in your own company because you are your own kind of worst abuser. And through my conversations with Alex, I really began to build a better relationship to myself as I realized how much I was missing out on by virtue of the fact that I wasn't able to be safe in my own company and give myself pleasure. And so it was the work that we did in sex therapy that helped me begin to build this stronger and more, it sounds cliche, but like loving relationship with myself. And then that was a kind of springboard from which my relationship to sex kind of transformed quite dramatically.
Is it, obviously with eating disorders, most of the time it's a form of control, isn't it? So is one of the things that you were talking with Alex, was it surrender, like surrendering to like yourself and letting go? And
yeah, it's all about control, because it's interesting, because it's something that's definitely coming up again now in my life, because as anyone with an eating disorder knows, it never fully goes away. No longer being sick is a huge thing, because it means I can go on holiday on my own. I have nights in on my own, and rather than like being sick, I make myself dinner, I read a book. Like, it's liberated me from a really, I think, scary and quite cloistering mindset. But the control thing definitely does manifest in a myriad of other ways. And I definitely find now I'll be dating someone and we begin to sleep together, and I do having, like, being able to enjoy sex and really submit to sexual pleasure is, as you say, about surrendering. It's about being able to be completely present in your body.
In that moment.
And that's hard. Not only because we have busy lives, we're always... I actually interviewed Chloe McIntosh recently. I've interviewed her quite a few times. We were catching up recently. She's the founder of Karma, which is a sexual wellness app, which is... They do some brilliant stuff if anyone wants some really good, really practical sex ed, actually, like how to give a blowjob. It's there, as well as the kind of more theoretical stuff. But I was speaking to Chloe about how technology has changed our relationship to sex and the impact it's continuing to have on our experience of sex and sensuality. And she just made the point, which I think is such an astute one, that we're spending more and more of our time online these days. I was reading a stat earlier that said young people, like teenagers now, are spending up to 6 hours a day just scrolling on their phones.
Isn't it like 2 months of the full year? Something like crazy, because I've read that same stat.
Isn't it wild?
I think now, like, do we touch our phones more than our partners?
Yes.
And I think...
Or ourselves.
Yeah.
And this is what Chloe was saying. She was like, we're so used to spending such vast quantities of our time on our phone, immersed in this online world, wherever we choose to exist in that space, which is taking us out of our bodies and into our heads. So we're spending more and more time in our head, disconnected from our bodies. And so it gets harder, she says, to then be able to step out of that very kind of head-focused headspace and be able to really sit back into our body, which is so fundamental to sensuality, to sexuality, to sexual embodiment. And so I think when we look at now, statistics show, doing the NatSal survey, which is the worldwide, the biggest sexual behaviors survey that explores our relationship to sex, and that happens, I think in the UK, the survey is done every 10 years. And the survey has, I think it was done again in 2024, there's a new one just recently been released, and it's basically finding that decade on decade we're having less and less sex. And there are many reasons for this, but one of them definitely is technology. The fact that we're just spending so much of our time on our phones, swiping, clicking, and that takes us away from touching our partners, touching ourselves, feeling sexual and embodied. And I know when I'm in a really stressed, head over body mindset, and then I masturbate, for example, I've noticed my orgasms are like really tepid by comparison, because I feel like this kind of disconnect has occurred.
That's interesting.
And if you take time to actually be a bit more mindful when you are masturbating, I think it's really quite a good indicator of how present in your body you are. Do try out. There's a really good startup by a company called Lioness, female-founded company. Absolutely love them. And they've created the world's first smart vibrator that allows you to track and measure your orgasms.
Oh, shut up.
So you can see your orgasm patterns. And it's really cool because...
What's this called?
It's called Lioness. Get one immediately. It's a dildo vibrator that allows you to then match up with your phone so that you can then track your orgasm data. And that may seem kind of like why do we need our orgasm data? But actually it's huge, because we have such a dearth of research into female pleasure specifically.
It's a girth then, sorry.
So you basically insert it, and then it has a lots of vibration stuff. And it allows you then to track your orgasm data so that you can ostensibly see what are the triggers for you having a more powerful orgasm? What is the context in which perhaps you struggle to orgasm or have a kind of weak orgasm? They also discovered, I think it was last year, 3 different types of orgasm. And I'm not going to butcher it, but it was something like tornado, volcano, something, based on like how people tend to, like the contractions that tend to happen around people's pelvic floor when they orgasm. But this is really big because it's contributing to our better understanding of female pleasure and orgasm. But again, and reinforce, I think, this idea of like, it's really important to be, I think, aware of your body's like connection to pleasure and to sexuality. So that was a bit of a tangent, but I thought it was interesting.
So one of the things that I think I wanted to speak to you specifically is because, you know, this podcast is all about how to get happiness from internal instead of seeking external pleasure and, you know, through social media, the houses, the cars, all this bags and all the bollocks. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong and give me your opinion, but I think it ultimately comes down to self-love, really. Like the first of it is being your own first love, first of all, and how you feel about yourself, and that also impacts your relationships. If you know how you feel about yourself, like I was speaking to another guest beforehand, and when you don't love yourself, you can't have the best sex, you know, because you don't, there's a disconnect there, isn't there? And I think the first thing is to love yourself. So what advice would you give to people that are going through that? Maybe they can't connect to their bodies, can't connect to themselves. What would be the number one thing to start on their sort of journey?
It's a really good point, and I think we talk a lot about self-love. I feel it's become a bit like a buzzword in our society without really thinking about what it really means, aside from buying, you know, different products and stuff like that for your face. But I think it does start, as you rightly said there, like very much within.
Who am I as a person?
Who are you and how do you connect to yourself? And it's a topic we talk about a lot at Sex Talks, and one I've really, I think through sex therapy and then through doing the talks, really explored and grappled with, because I think I talk about it a lot in the context of dating, actually, even more than sex. Because I think I definitely used to date in a way that I was looking for validation, and I was looking for someone else to fill my cup and to be my knight in shining armor, whatever the phrase is, and come and fill this what felt like kind of void internally. And so I would date looking for men, hoping that I'd find someone who would take my hand and be like, let me show you the world. Let me show you how to have this amazing life, because I felt like I couldn't do it on my own. And that to me is kind of the antithesis of what we're talking about here when it comes to self-love, because I was essentially trying to delegate responsibility to someone else to make my life feel fulfilling and make me happy, which is not only a very burdensome task to pin onto someone else, but it's never going to work, because as you say, someone else can't give you the tools, the things to make your life better. That really has to come from yourself. And it also means you end up dating and having sex with a scarcity mindset and a sense of, I need you, I need this, rather than an abundant mindset of, I'm great, my cup is full, and this is a wonderful additive, which I think is a much healthier mindset to go into sex and dating. So I think when it comes to advice on how to foster a better relationship to yourself in order to go into dating, into sex with better relationship to yourself and that kind of reserve of self-love, I think it really starts with liking yourself, not necessarily loving yourself. Just like, do you like yourself? Are you able to say, I like the way I walk, I like the way I talk, paraphrasing her directly? And I think that's a really good piece of advice, because I think that sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, additional pressure to, you know, body positivity, to love our bodies, to love ourselves every single day, which sometimes in a world that particularly is quite a misogynistic world, very patriarchal world, can be hard to do. But I also think something that I guess I really took from sex therapy is, can you look after yourself? Because when I had an eating disorder, I mean, I still latently do, but in the real kind of throes of having an eating disorder, when I was disconnected from sex, really disconnected from my body, I wasn't able to look after myself. I wasn't safe in my own company. And it meant my relationship to myself was really unstable and really insecure. So I knew that if I had a night in on my own, it would typically be really, really anxiety inducing. I'd get so overwhelmed with, okay, all these things I could possibly do, because I was always very busy and out and about. So if I was on my own, I'd get kind of really anxious, go down the spiral, and then I would cook and be sick. That was kind of my routine to like restore control and order. What that did was meant that I had a really unsafe relationship to myself. So I wasn't my own protector. And when you're going out into the world, not able to, in the privacy of your own home and by yourself, care for yourself, it makes you, I think, very vulnerable to other people then using and abusing you. And that sounds very extreme. I don't necessarily mean in a kind of violent way, but just kind of breaching your boundaries because you haven't really set your own boundaries because you don't have them with yourself. And so in the context of sex therapy, we worked a lot on helping me to get better at caring for myself and being my number one carer and protector. And obviously with sex therapy, so a lot was focused on sex, but actually like focusing on pleasure and taking time to masturbate and taking time, not even just to masturbate, but to like notice what things in my life gave me pleasure, because I was always looking for pain. I associated, my connection to my body was one of pain. It was overexercise, undereat, be sick, all those things. So it was a very negative one. Whereas what we focused on was like, how do you shift that mindset and focus on the things that give you pleasure in your day? That first sip of coffee in the morning, a hot shower after, a cold run, those things that are so pleasurable. There are ways of showing yourself that you're cared for, that you're looked after. And so I think when I came away from that for me was such a integral way of building up these kind of personal reserves of self-love through genuine self-care. And once you can become your own best protector and carer, I think you then become much better at setting your boundaries and your expectations with regards to what you can expect and what you demand from other people.
Do you think apps can be quite damaging, for forming relationships and that connection? Do you think it sort of encourages the separation, the quick bang type thing?
So questions are being discussed rightfully so much now, because obviously we are living in a culture in which, we said before, we're online the whole time, and dating apps obviously play a huge part of our current dating culture. Whether you choose to be on a dating app or not, dating apps have changed the landscape in which you're dating. So we're all being affected by the way in which dating apps may have influenced the way we meet people and connect with people. I really go back and forth on this because I don't think it's right to damn dating apps and say dating apps have ruined our dating culture. Because as with anything, it's a piece of technology that is a tool for us to meet people if we want to. And it's really about how we use the apps as opposed to the app being inherently good or evil. And obviously, I recognize that dating apps and all social media apps generally are built in such a way that they want to keep you on the app. That's their business model. So I recognize there are certain business incentives that might be misaligned or are misaligned with what many people want from dating. But I think I'm always cautious to be condemnatory, kind of in one fell swoop of kind of dating apps generally, because I think particularly for the queer community, they have been a really fantastic way of people meeting people they might not come across in their day-to-day life. So, we're sitting in a studio in London. London is such a busy metropolitan city. You have access to so many clubs and bars and queer nights, etc. But for a lot of people who don't live in London, it might be much harder to meet people who are also queer, also have kind of shared interests, where dating apps have really facilitated that. But I think it's more a broader question about how, which we've kind of articulated there, but how our relationship to our phones and online culture more generally has impacted the way we interact with our fellow human. Because I think that's really the issue we're grappling with, isn't it? Because apps are an extension of that. Apps have just...
It's a tool.
It's a tool, exactly. Yeah. And again, it's very much how you use it. But I do think this dependence on being online, communicating with your network via social media, spending your day emailing, not picking up the phone, I think is damaging the way that all of us connect and communicate. If you're more comfortable communicating via WhatsApp, which, let's face it, so many of us now are, of course that's then, I think, going to make it more difficult to connect naturally and organically, and also be able to be vulnerable with people in person. So I think it's really actually, we have to all examine the way that we navigate this kind of online world. And I know just personally, I feel like I've become so addicted to my phone. And I think it's bad and you're like refreshing the banking app just to get some hit of dopamine from some notification. But I'll find myself out in social situations with friends when I've been in a particularly kind of work-focused hole. So I've been very like on my phone, editing videos, And I'll be at dinner or with friends and I'm just thinking about my phone. I'm thinking about checking my notifications and I'm like, That is wild to me. I am in the company of fantastic people. All I'm looking for on my phone is connection, but it's pseudo connection on my phone. It's real in real life, and yet I need that dopamine hit from the phone. And like, that's something that I think is so emblematic about online culture, and something we probably all have to work on.
Well, I grew up Catholic.
Yeah.
I went to a Catholic school, and I remember when like my granddad died, and I was sort of from the school made to feel that like the spirit of my granddad would be like surrounding me, watching me. So I never went off the rails in my teenage years, and never had like loads of sexual partners, or, you know, being a slag as that would be called, because I was convinced that my granddad would be like watching me. I'm interested in religion and the shame element of it, and also misogyny as well. I know there was people around me where growing up, some of my friends maybe would consent to sex and go on one night stands, but then certain men around me would be like, oh, well, they're slags. And I'm like, oh my God. But there's so much shame around that. Yeah. And just, have you got any advice for anyone who comes from a religious family that maybe struggles with that feeling of shame?
It's so interesting you say that. I also grew up in a religious household and went to church every Sunday with my mum, or most Sundays, sometimes not, and had a very fear-based relationship to God, or the God that I imagined then. And I remember the first time and the only time in my adolescence that I masturbated, and it was in the bath, and it was the classic shower head situ. Yeah. And I felt so, and I think I would have been 12 maybe, and no, maybe younger, like probably like 11. And I'd never kissed anyone. I'd kissed my school friends, actually, all my gals. I'd kissed all of them, but I'd never kissed a boy before. Just want to recognize those early sexual experiences that we often discount but are really formative. But so I did use a shower head, and it felt amazing, of course, and I felt racked with guilt because I felt God was watching, and God would smite me, and I was this sinner, and I was a bad girl, and I never did it again until I was like at university, and I was like 19, and I was no longer religious. Spiritual, yes. Religious, no. And so I totally empathize that. And it's a conversation that comes up a lot at sex talks, because I think the prevalence of sexual shame as rooted in religious doctrine is just so widespread. And I think that that's also constantly reinforced by society. You know, sex is such a kind of taboo in our society, and that reinforces the shame that surrounds it. But you mentioned there the kind of double standards, or the way in which women particularly would get labeled with like words like slut. It would be like, you're either slut or a prude. You don't put out and you're a prude. I was a prude. Or you do put out and you're a slut. And it's this kind of double bind, so you can't really win. And I think Freud talks a lot about this in his earlier work, about it's the Madonna versus whore complex. So women get put into this kind of binary categorization when it comes to how men typically see them. So man typically wants to marry the Madonna, aka the virginal, puritanical mother of his children, and wants to have sex with the whore because she's a dirty whore, which is...
Hello, ex-boyfriends. That's what it is, though.
It's still, and I think it sounds, you know, every time I talk about this kind of Freudian binary, it just sounds so archaic, but then you look around society and it's still so like prominent, a theme that is so encoded within a lot of our kind of cultural psyche. But you asked me specifically for advice, I think, for anyone who is feeling this shame. And I think I would say, I'd probably take a step back and say probably sexual shame more broadly. And I think, sexual shame is a really powerful way of keeping people in line with a specific kind of idea of our typically like gendered roles in our society. And we live in a patriarchal society, like, let's not forget, we're reminded of that daily. And so I think if you're feeling that flicker of shame that I think so many of us know so well when it comes to sex, when it comes to whether you masturbate, whether it's sex you've had with a partner or whatever, I think really sit with that shame, be like, where is this coming from? What are the feelings that are coming up here? So, okay, what am I feeling? What am I feeling in the shame? Now, where's the kind of the badness coming from? So what is that? What is the idea? And try and locate what are the ideas that are feeding into this feeling of shame and where they're coming from. And try and unpack those. Be like, but who told me that? Yeah. Why is it bad if I have sex and I enjoyed it and I don't want to see that person again? Why is it bad if I masturbate 3 times a day with a bath, shower head, whatever it may be? And I think because a lot of the way in which shame, particularly around sex, I think works most efficaciously in our society is in that it works unconsciously. So we end up abiding by a lot of these kind of socially inscribed taboos. And the shame is the thing that kind of keeps us in abidance to that without questioning them. And I always go back to this line that sex therapist Kate Moyle has mentioned many times in sex talks. She's banned the word should from her sex therapy room because she was like,
just in life in general, when people tell you what you should do,
you should do this, and then so that you shouldn't do that. And I think it's about examining these like baked in assumptions of what we should and shouldn't do, how we should and shouldn't be, and really asking ourselves where this has come from, and is this a belief that I actually want to actively prescribe to? Do I actively want this belief? And the answer may be yes. You may be like, yeah, this actually is important for me to live my life in accordance with this. Fine, but be active in the way you subscribe to these beliefs rather than allowing these kind of baked-in assumptions to continually kind of flare up and patrol the way you behave without you really actually being actively aware of it.
I think as well, it's what do I want? What do I like? And that's what I've started to question this year. Like, I'm been told for so long what I am or what I should do, what I shouldn't do. And I'm like, no, what do I want? What makes me happy? And I think that's something else is, as long as it makes you happy, you're not hurting anyone, fucking do it.
And it's a really powerful thing, I think, to say I want and to really like own it.
Yeah.
And I think when I look back, I mean, sexually and beyond to my life and a lot of my 20s was really spent doing things because, yeah, to your point, I felt like I should. I felt like, you know, when specifically with sex, I felt a lot of the sex I had, particularly early on, kind of before I met that I had one long-term boyfriend with whom I had great sex. I just wanted to clarify. But the way I had sex was very much in accordance to what I felt was kind of like my duty to please a man.
Yeah.
And I would kind of behave accordingly, and I would really have sex in order to give the other person pleasure and really not think about my own body and my own pleasure, which meant that for a long time I didn't explore my connection to my body or myself and didn't explore what I actually liked. So I remember once when I was like 20, I think I was like 26, so it wasn't even like that long ago. I slept with this guy, and it was a one night stand, but I remember him saying to me, he's like kissing to her, and he's like, what do you like? What do you like? And I just stopped and I was like, and I realized no one had ever asked me that before. And I was 26. And moreover, I'd never asked myself because I'd always seen sex as this kind of performative act that was for somebody else's pleasure. And it was something that I showed up, I did, and I was trying my best to please someone else. But it was a really confronting thing of like, well, and in my head I was like, I don't know what I like. And with that, I mean, I then, you know, it was a couple more years until I then did sex therapy, but it was then doing sex therapy that I realized, first of all, it's a lot of responsibility to put on someone else to help you figure out what you like and what you want. Like, it's not really fair to delegate responsibility to a sexual partner to just somehow magically work out how to press the right buttons. Like, it doesn't work like that. And it really is our own personal responsibility to figure out our own bodies and to discover what feels good and conversely what feels bad. And so I think it was then over the period of time of doing sex therapy where I really got to, through masturbating, through self-exploration, figure out what is it that I do like, what turns me on, what makes me feel good, what don't I want someone to be doing, and then to practice articulating that. And that was the thing I actually really struggled with. And I think especially as women, if we've been kind of primed to be, you know, feel quite dutiful and abide by all these shoulds, it's one thing finding out what you want or getting a bit more of an inkling. It's another thing actually articulating it. And I've really struggled with that for a long time, of actually being in the context of sex, being able to be like, can you do this or can you do that? Because I would hate hearing myself say it, but I think that's just something that over time, it's like muscle memory. You just have to do it.
And get over it, don't we?
Exactly.
So I remember growing up with my being in the Catholic family. My nana used to always say, obviously when I was older, about how the sex is for the man. So it's like I'm wondering whether it's like a generational thing or more of a religious thing. I don't know, but that's why I'm really interested in this particular topic of self-discovery and working out what we like, and trying to educate that next generation of people who maybe don't have the confidence yet to ask what they want or know what they want. So I think that's a really great bit of advice for them. In terms of relationships and sexless relationships, what do you think causes the breakdown of that? And do you think people should stay in a sexless relationship?
Ooh, that's a good question. Dr. Karen Gurney, I can't remember if I've mentioned her already, but I feel like I have this kind of sprawling group of amazing sex therapists who I've interviewed so much at Sex Talks and who I just constantly revert back to because they're just absolute fonts of wisdom. But she talks about this a lot in her two books, Mind the Gap and How Not to Let Having Children Ruin Your Sex Life. And she talks a lot about like kind of sexual currency and how we have to, in order to maintain the sexual currency within the context of a long-term relationship, we need to be able to try new things. And trying new things relies very heavily on being able to communicate to our partner, hey, I'd love to try this, or I'd love to try that. Because invariably, like over time, you're gonna get bored of doing the same thing over and over again. Even if you think you found the like absolute winning ticket to make you come amazingly, over time, that's gonna get a bit boring. So I think sexless, you can't say blanketly this is the reason, but I would imagine a lot of times sexual relationships break down in the context of a long-term relationship is poor communication, is not being able to say when you're no longer enjoying the sex that you're having. And we also have to remember that what we want sexually is going to change all the time. It's going to change month to month as our hormones fluctuate, particularly as women around our menstrual cycle. But also if you have children, if you're trying for children, even the stress around that, menopause, there's so many things within our lives that are going to impact on our sexual desire, how our body feels, how we feel about our body, which invariably will impact the kind of sex that we want and the kind of sex we feel comfortable having. And so for me, I think the most important thing in any relationship, but particularly when it comes to keeping our sexual relationship with someone strong, is constant communication. It's my sex therapist said this every session: communication, communication. And it sounds so simple, but I think often it's actually the hardest thing, particularly I think if you're not used to talking about sex, if sex isn't something that you necessarily feel comfortable addressing to anyone, but maybe also to your partner, maybe it's kind of a difficult thing for people to bring up. And we've just been talking about shame, sexual shame, rooted in religion. There's so many hurdles that I think people do often face when it comes to just speaking openly and frankly about sex. But I always think of sex as a kind of extension of our language. It's just the way we communicate with someone that we're attracted to through our body, but we have to have the verbal conversations around it first to make it the best it can be. So I think that, a big thing with people maintaining that kind of sexual currency that Dr. Karen Gurney talks about is just being able to communicate with a partner and not being afraid to say, maybe not like I hate what we do, the kind of sex we're having, but I would love to try new things. I would love, and maybe it can be, it doesn't have to be posed as a criticism. I was listening to a podcast the other day and they were talking about sex and they suggested trying a threesome, or they suggested, X, Y, and Z. What would you feel about that? Yeah. And you can see, and there are even apps now that allow you to match up with your, you can like connect to your partner and you can both then like things, like kind of kinky things that you want to do. And then it'll show both of you the things that you both want to try. Right. So if you, and I think that's just one way of helping break down potential embarrassment or shame you might feel about having a conversation around sex with your partner.
Because you never know, they might be into the same thing. Yeah,
exactly. And I think it's also when you create it can feel embarrassing having a conversation around sex. Of course it can. But also when you create the space with someone, and I think this is true as much with a one-night stand as it is with a long-term partner, when you create the space through opening up a conversation about sex, you're saying something like, hey, can we talk about, what we just did, or can we talk about kind of sex we both want before having sex? You also create a space for them to be vulnerable, and they might not feel able to be vulnerable. They might be putting on a bit of a show for you. They want to, portray themselves in a certain way, particularly if you don't know them so well. So I think also, it gives the other person an opportunity to be vulnerable, which maybe they would also really appreciate.
I think as well with marriage, I think because I've been married 10 years and together with him for 12 years, and I think what's been really important is the communication. So if he pisses me off or does something, instead of letting it fester and sitting there and causing resentment, that turns into poison and it just spreads throughout the body, and then you don't want to spend time with them, you don't want to touch them, you don't want to be around them. That causes separation. And I think we've really both worked on communicating with each other, so it never gets to that point when we're annoyed with each other. So the resentment's like zero, because we're open to communicate about everything. Just you've not done the dishes or whatever, or you've not done this for our daughter. But also, my advice would be, when you do have kids, you have to schedule sex. You have to schedule like date nights. As unsexy as it sounds, you have to schedule that time, that one-on-one time, without devices, without phones, to reconnect. And I think people don't invest in that enough. They just won't have date nights, and they think it's bad for couples to have couple time. But me and my husband, we prioritize ourselves first, because then that's teaching our daughter what a healthy relationship looks like. We put ourselves first in the sense of love and how we are with each other, because I want her to see a healthy relationship and what a healthy partner should look like. So when she's older, she sees that. She sees us being affectionate. She sees us going on date nights and having time for ourselves as well. Like, I will have a bath every night. It's non-negotiable. That's what I want to do to decompress. She sees that I'm putting myself, my mental health, everything, my well-being first, because I love myself. And that's what I want to do. That's the gift I'm giving myself.
How often do you have scheduled date nights with your husband, if you don't mind me asking?
It depends on work, and we tend to just stay in, because we have such a life staying in, and we'll be in the garden and we'll cook outside and stuff. We at least do it once a week, at least minimum. We don't necessarily go out, but we'll have like a date night in.
That's great.
And we'll put the devices away, but at least sometimes
and the
it's 2 or 3.
devices away, do you always like lock them away?
We just have them in a different room. We don't have them. We're never on it. We're never scrolling when it's just our time.
Because it's amazing how much phones, because they've become so normalized in our culture, as in you're so used to seeing everyone check it all the time, it's like seen as acceptable. I think particularly if you're not with someone like long term, so I'm single, so I'm dating, but it's like it feels quite difficult to call it out to someone else, but it's so horrible when someone checks their phone constantly when you're with them, because it's so like insulting. You think, is my company not satisfying enough? And I know, like, we're all addicted, so I get it, but I think it has to be a hard and fast rule that you don't allow technology to come into that, like, designated space and time. I think, but it was a boundary. Like, now I won't go out with certain friends now because they're just on the phone the whole time, and I'm like, do you know what, my time's actually really precious. I'm not going to spend it while you're spending our time while you're on Facebook or Instagram. Go and be on that. Go off. Don't waste my time. If you want to be on the phone, fine, do your stuff. But then ring fence the time you have with other people. Totally. No, I agree. Useful tip for me. I'm going to take that over. So it's a biohack within itself. Orgasms are great for us mentally. It's got so many benefits to it. And I think people don't even realize that. So the education around that, we need to really get that out there. So that's why I think you're doing a fantastic job. But I think the importance as well is as we get older to continue having sex. And I tried to Google it, but then I didn't want to affect my Google history about what's the oldest person on record that's had sex. Do we even know that? Is there a figure out there? Like, I'm really interested. You know what? I have loads of stats at my fingertips, and that is not one of them, but I wish I did.
I think it's a really important thing to not just has sex to be seen for younger people, that actually you can be older and banging away.
100%. And I think You asked before, should you stay in a sexless relationship? Which I guess is the kind of other side of the coin of, you hope to be in a very kind of passionate, sexy relationship until the day you die. And I think what I would say to that is, it really is personal to everybody. And you might be in a relationship where you don't have a lot of sex as we understand it. You're maybe like penetrative sex, you're not having maybe a lot of orgasms together, but you might have lots of other ways in which you're really intimate and you show one another like that they're desired, and you feel desired, they feel desired. Intimacy, I think, comes in many different forms. So I think it's really about what you need. If you're someone who does need a lot of passionate, intense sex, you like fucking and you want orgasms, fantastic. Then obviously you do need to ensure that you are maintaining that with your partner and you are doing the work together, working on communication, maintaining date nights, keeping that kind of spark between you two alive, because that's something that's really important to you and hence your overall kind of health and well-being. But I also think if you're in a relationship where you don't have a lot of sex, but you're really happy and you really love one another's company and you love the intimacy you share, I also don't think that you should feel bad about that and feel like your relationship is somehow lesser than because it isn't as like sex filled as your best friends, because it really is such a personal thing. It's what you need individually.
But what if there's one that really wants a lot of sex and the other one, that's where the sexual
mismatched desire,
compatibility with sex, that's a huge problem.
It's a really
so what should we do in that situation? Because I know a lot of people stay in relationships, especially for the kids, but then what is that teaching the kids? Like, I think the effect that that's going to have on the kid when they're older, they're not seeing a healthy relationship.
A healthy relationship is one in which you feel really safe and happy and content and inspired, and also in which you are holding one another up. You're on one another's team.
Yeah.
I back you, you back me. It's not going to be great every single day. We're also not going to have the best sex always, but we're going to talk about it when we don't, and we're going to talk about it when we do. We're going to keep on talking about it. And I think that, you know, if you mentioned that mismatch desire, it's a huge issue. It's the number one question I would say that comes up at sex talks. And I mean, if you genuinely, I think first of all, it's down to communication. You have to understand, do you actually have mismatched desire? Does one of you really want lots of sex and the other one absolutely doesn't? Or is the other person really stressed at work? What are the inhibitors that are preventing one of you from not wanting sex? It might be body image issues. It might be stress at work. It might be financial issues because they're making you, again, stress. And stress is a big inhibitor on sexual desire. So I think it's about really working out what is affecting your respective relationships to sex first and foremost. Then I guess it's about working out kind of what you both need and want from the relationship in all aspects, but then also sexually. And then if it comes to a point where you really, really do want very different things from your sex lives, but you still want to be together and you still like the life you've built together, then maybe it's about exploring, you know, different ways of getting sexually satisfied. Maybe it's opening the relationship up. Maybe it's exploring threesomes. I think we have to break away from the idea that there is a one specific model, kind of normative model of what a healthy relationship looks like, which is typically in our very heteronormative society, a man and a woman, and then they have a dog, and then they have 2 children, and they have a house, all those sorts of things. That this is what your life should look like.
This is the formula.
This is the formula, exactly. It's not the formula. There's loads of different ways to build a happy life, and there's loads of different ways to build a happy relationship, and that can look very different from person to person, from couple to couple. So I think that's, like, again, not to labour the point, but it always comes back to communication, because it's about working out what you both need in that relationship to be able to feel safe and to be able to be happy.
I think it's getting a bit late now. We've got bedtime. So thank you very much for coming and telling us all great advice around sex and shame and some amazing advice to help us stop taking ourselves too seriously and just go and bang away.
Exactly. I'm going to take a leaf out of your book, scheduling in those dates, which I think is such a good idea. So thank you so much for having me.
No, I can't wait for the book to come out as well.
Oh, me too.
Thank you.
Thank you.